You're live.
Good afternoon, and welcome to another broadcast from Trophy of Life. We are a nonprofit organization that has a mandate to render hope and encouragement to all that we come in contact with. I am Billy Morgan Jackson. I serve along with our visionary founder, Portia Wheatley, who is our Chief Executive Officer over this great nonprofit organization. Today, I am real excited. I have a friend who's going to be sharing with us. I think she's been in my life over 20 plus years, if I'm not mistaken about that. And we're going to talk today, or have a conversation, as I like to call it, about moving from trauma to triumph. In the midst of this chaotic situation that we're in the world today, we want to share that even though you may have experienced trauma or you might be in the trauma, there is still hope that you can move from trauma to triumph.
Abs-
Today, our special guest is Nakia Jones. She is a licensed social worker, and she is also a mental health um, therapist. Um, I'm kind of nervous because this is a subject that affects a lot of people that I know. And so forgive me for stumbling, which is not really what I normally do. Most people know I just talk off the cuff. But this is a real serious matter that's dear to my heart. And today we're going to have a conversation about it. I like to start off by saying um, I looked up the definition of trauma. And to put it simply, it said that it's a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. And it involves events that are very difficult to cope, or sometimes it's so much out of our control. And we've got an expert today that's going to help us in this area and help walk us through some steps on how we can move from trauma to triumph. Nakia, you have the floor.
My sister. It has been well over 20, 25 years that we have been in each other's life. So I so appreciate you calling on me for this very important discussion and creating space for us to address some things that we don't typically get a chance to address. So I just want to thank you for this space and welcome anyone who is listening in, watching in, and let's get into this very much needed, particularly with the events that happened this morning at the school. We're talking about trauma itself, and it has grown in the definition of what we typically believe trauma to have been 10 years ago, limited to physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. And now we have gotten a clearer understanding that trauma really is any event or incident that has happened in your life that impacts your ability to interface with the world around you. It impacts your ability to see yourself in a healthy manner. It impacts your ability to build healthy relationships. It impacts your ability to process through emotions properly. And so
Mhm.
trauma is that thing that projects on us that we're living through a lens of this event that has, affected us in our life.
Okay. You're the expert. Give us the clinical um, definition of trauma and the areas that it affects emotionally,
Mhm, mhm,
psychologically, sometimes physically.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
Clue us in on
Perfect.
that too.
Great question. And so just going back to what I said, I gave you a great foundation of what it is. And I don't want us to get locked into this is what it has to be.
Hmm.
Because as other mental health clinicians will tell you, and those that do extensive research and training within the field of trauma, this idea, this understanding, this impact continues to grow and extend. So I don't want us to get locked into that, this is what it is, a psychological event that impacts your ability to do this because it's ever growing. The
Hmm.
important part to understand is that it affects your ability to live a healthy life. It
Okay.
affects your ability to have a normalcy in the way we relate, the way we emote, and the way that we show up for ourselves.
Hmm. You said a mouthful. Let's bring it home.
Okay.
Can you share with us um, what you've been through and the process you took to get to where you are now?
Mhm. Ooh, my sister, you're hitting some buttons today, but this is good because you know, many people talk about a traumatic, past, but they're not willing to share that experience with someone who may be struggling with the same thing. And I'll share this that my childhood was not always a safe space for me, emotionally, psychologically, and unfortunately, physically. My home wasn't conducive for me to experience the fullness of what a child should have. The love, the care, the belongingness was lacking. And that is not to say that those in my home did not provide my needs materialistically, did not provide a roof and food. And it was the emotional and the psychological and the physical effects that carried me through my childhood and unfortunately my young adulthood. And so by the time I got to my 20s and I thought I was grown and I thought that I was an adult and living my life, trauma began to show up in the way that I communicated and the way that I, you know, interacted with my relationships. I can't even tell you that I was building relationships at that time because what I was doing was going through a traumatic motion. And so people saw that on me, not knowing what I was dealing with. And so there was no internal peace. And until someone, I'd say I was in my late 20s, 28, 29. Someone said to me, you need to talk to somebody about that. There's a reason that you do that. There's a reason that you view yourself this way. There's the low self-esteem. There was low self-esteem. There was low self-worth. And that showed up in my relationships and that showed up in how I carried myself, how I saw myself, how I even communicated about myself. And of course, anyone that was in my space had the
Hmm.
unfortunate experience of living that out with me. So I was living my trauma at that time. And I'm grateful for, many men and women in my life that wanted the best for me and that encouraged me to see beyond where I was living. I was living in trauma. And so I'm grateful for a therapeutic space that was created for me to process through those events that occurred in my life. And I get the a fortune of doing that now for so many others, youth included, and adults as well.
Wow, that is powerful, very powerful. Um, you talked about surviving or living in survival mode. And how does one get out of that just by living in survival? How does one, what steps, what process should we engage in to move from survival
Mhm.
toward triumph?
Okay.
Can you talk
That's
about
such a
that?
great question. That is such a great question. And to answer that effectively, I'll give you a little bit before we get to coming out of it. There's steps that you need to do. First of all, recognizing that you're living in a place of survival. Many of us don't know that that's what we're doing. If your household was like my household, you didn't talk about what happened in here. You dare not share what happens at home stays at home. This
Stays
is
at
our
home.
business. Nobody
Mhm.
belongs there. And until you are able to recognize in yourself, I'm not showing up for myself. I'm putting on this mask. I'm putting on a strong face. You know what they say, fake it till you make it. You get knocked down 10 times, you keep getting back up and you keep going. But at some point, you've got to identify what continues to knock me down, what continues
Mhm.
to throw me off emotionally and psychologically. Where are my thoughts? What is triggering that fall, that lapse, that struggle, that vulnerability? And we do it even in our faith-based environments. We got to go and we show up. I got to go minister today. I got to go sing today. And we're broken, right? And so we put ourselves in just surviving rather than doing the work of living, right? And so we first got to recognize I'm not optimized at my full potential right now. I've never dealt with those things that happen, right? And
Mhm.
and that could span from, our definition of trauma is so heavy now. It could be like we saw this morning, youth in school who are now exhibiting bad grades. They're
Mhm.
exhibiting behaviors in school, and the teachers and people may identify them as a bad kid, but what really happened is I'm afraid to go to school
Mhm.
because there was a shooting in the school, right? And I don't have any other way to express my emotions about this terrible thing that's happened. And so now it's showing up in my actions, right?
Mhm.
If you and I get the pleasure of working with, or the honor, excuse me, of working with many adults who trauma shows up in a relationship. You talk about survival mode, I'll get you before you get me, right? We self-sabotage, right? Or I gotta protect my heart at all costs, so I'm gonna tear you down to build myself up. I'm in survival.
Mhm.
When we've come from a place of psychological or emotional, right, residual of an event, we've got to realize that how I emote with another person, I'm argumentative, I'm irritable, I'm snappy. I'm surviving. And that's not identified as healthy communication. And so once you realize that I am living my life through this lens of trauma, then you need to do the work of identifying what it was that started this episode, this incident. And if it
Mhm.
was a course of incidents or a series of incidents, then we're looking at chronic trauma, right? So it wasn't just one thing. It was a multiplicity of things. And you need to have, or we need to have, this safe space to process the impact of what happened to me. We need the space to process through it
Mhm.
because this happened to me. And what happens is our defense mechanisms kick in. And what it is a protective measure. It's an unhealthy protective measure. And so we use these defense mechanisms to avoid any such hurt or pain ever again. And so we live our life behind this brick wall of trauma. Well, processing helps us tear down that, identifying the impact that it had, and creating safe spaces and coping skills to deal with it, to get through it, to overcome it, to manage it. And there's some events in our life, my sister Billy, we will always have memories of, right? We will always feel the presence of what happened, even if it was in our childhood. When we process through this trauma, there's no book that says it'll be gone. The goal is for us to create enough coping strategies to manage it when the residual resurfaces again. And that's, I pray every therapeutic space that focuses on trauma, that's my desire for everyone who seeks that space. Whew, whew.
First, you want it. You want it. So the very first thing that an individual must do, they've got to recognize where they are. That's the very
Absolutely.
first thing. The second
Absolutely.
thing, if I'm hearing you correctly, is they have got to go through process, which
Mhm.
means if I am going to process so that I can move from trauma to triumph, that means
Mhm.
I must engage someone to help me to do this.
Absolutely.
Someone who is skilled,
Mhm.
someone who is knowledgeable,
Mhm.
someone who will help me with life jackets so that I can move from this traumatic place on the road to triumph, which brings up therapy. Some people think therapy is not all that. I, for one, think that it is.
Mhm.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how to engage in therapy.
Mhm.
How do we approach that?
Mhm. That's such a great question. And unfortunately, there's a few areas in life that we diminish the impact, right? If your car had a mechanical failure, you take it to a mechanic, someone who is skilled in diagnosing the problem and
Hmm.
being able to repair it. If there was a medical concern, you go to a medical doctor, someone skilled in diagnosing or assessing and helping to create either overall lifestyle changes or corrective measures
Hmm.
to right. And it's so interesting that when it comes to our emotional well-being, we don't follow suit in that, right? And we lack in the attention that we need to pay to our emotional well-being because that affects every area of our life. It
Every
affects
area.
us in our relationships. It affects us psychologically. It affects our actions and our behaviors. It affects our relationships. It affects how we enter. I'm going to get in trouble for this, but it even affects how we experience God.
Hmm.
And so, of course, we need to be able to go to someone who is skilled in assessing and diagnosing and creating healthy habits to manage the symptoms, right? I believe in Jesus in therapy. I know lots of people are going to tell me, but I've spoken to my pastor told me to do this. And I am not against faith based environments. As a matter of fact, I fully believe that they are a healthy resource. Equally, I believe that there are some areas of trauma that are not meant to be resolved in faith based environments. And I know that's a touchy subject. It is a touchy subject, but the truth of the matter is that our faith-based environments are not built or designed to process through.
Hmm.
Our faith-based environments are built to reaffirm, right? To build up, to edify, to help you stay, in a place of healthy living. It reaffirms who you are, what you've overcome, what you're stronger than. But simply to tell someone who is living a life that they're trying to overcome this past trauma to pray about it. And I believe in the power of prayer. But prayer alone without processing and strategies is not enough. It's not. It's not. Right? Telling someone to trust God creates an unhealthy exchange with that person and God. Because what it means is that I'm not trusting Him enough with this stuff that happened in my life. And that is not a healthy exchange with God. right? And I've had the honor of working with couples, and they've been told, honor your spouse. And I'll tell you this, what it creates is, if I am honoring my spouse in this abuse or neglect or emotional well, then it means that God also honors the abuse, the neglect, or the emotional well. And that creates a bigger problem with that person now faulting or charging God with the actions of a person. And so we have to create spaces that we get into it and we process through the impact that it has on your life, and creating coping skills and strategies to overcome it. Again, our faith-based environments are a part of our support system. So are our friends. So are some family members that are there to help encourage you and help bring you hope. But without that piece to diagnose and assess, then we're leaving ourselves as a gap.
It's so powerful because just like you alluded to earlier, when you have a specific malfunction that's going on in one area, you go to the one who can fix it, who
Mhm.
can help you to overcome that deficiency that's there. And I believe that God enables people like you and others who are human, who represent Him in the earth, but still are skilled to do
Mhm.
the work that you do, as
Mhm.
far as helping us to move from trauma toward triumph.
Right.
Um,
That's
and,
right.
and we have to understand that it is a process. Life itself is a process. You
That's right.
don't attain success overnight. There is a process. There is a process to get us from trauma to triumph.
Triumph.
Triumph, is considered a great success. It's considered a victory. It's considered having great satisfaction over an adverse situation.
Mhm.
So there is process, and in that process, we need to engage those that can assist us so we can walk that road toward triumph.
That's right.
Let's
Absolutely.
talk about, because everybody's not a believer.
Mhm.
You address those that may not be believers, and by believers, our audience, we're talking about having faith and a relationship with Jesus Christ. For those who are not in that status yet,
Mhm. Mhm.
how would you approach this subject with them?
Mhm.
Because we alluded to earlier about faith,
Mhm.
but our faith is working with process.
Mhm.
How do we address those individuals that are not in that category?
Mhm. Mhm. If I told you that it was easier for those who have not cultivated a faith-based belief in their life to be open to therapy, would you believe me? It's
I would.
easier than
I
I
would.
It's easier because it takes away the thought that there's a divine being that is allowing this terrible thing to happen. And it complicates the trauma. Without that, people understand that this terrible thing happened to me, right? But there are other thoughts that convolute that: family beliefs, cultural beliefs, right? Ethnic beliefs, right?
Hmm.
That uh, kind of put us in a box that isn't trauma, or is just the way my community is. Is this
Hmm.
really, affecting me like it, or do I just need to get over it? Or, things that we hear across the board, that's not affecting you like that. And so there's other things, whether you're faith-based or not, that also are variables in this circumstances. And either way, recognizing that it is impacting your life is the key, right?
Mhm.
Seeking out a safe space, doing the work, securing a therapist is one of the most important and vital things that you'll do. I don't suggest that you do it lightly. I suggest that you take your time with it. Check the credentials, check the person's experience, and check your comfortability with that person. That in and of itself will help you lower those areas of that we hid behind. We keep those in safe spaces. And you need to have an environment where you trust or you're at least open to trusting that person. So finding a therapist is extremely important. We don't find a doctor haphazardly, right? And we don't find jobs haphazardly. Some of us do. And then we realize, oh, this is not the right place for me. And that's okay too, right? And you work with a therapist and you realize this is not the best for me. Maybe I need to make a transition. Do it. Your health and your wellness is at stake, right? I'm not promoting you to leave your therapist where you are. I'm promoting for you to find a space where you optimize your area of your level of growth. I don't want any of my clinical friends to fuss at me, right? What's important is I think what we can agree is all of my clinical friends will agree that finding an appropriate space for you that you feel
Mhm.
safe and able to do the work is the most important thing.
Amen.
Amen.
Um, Someone who isn't ready for therapy yet,
Mhm.
are there steps they can take?
Mhm. I think I'm going to assume that the person has already recognized something is going on that I can't manage on my own, but I'm
Okay.
not quite ready to go talk to someone. I would say to that person, create safe spaces for you that encourage you to show up for yourself. You want to be around people that remind you you're you're enough, right?
Mhm.
Remind you that you're worth growing past this moment in your life. I am so grateful that there were people in my life that saw me outside of my trauma, right? I realized that many people see us inside of the trauma and they keep you there for the rest of your life, right? They create a percep- perception box that's who you are, that's who you'll be. Don't look for those people. Create circles of safe space where people see you outside of survival mode and help show up for you, right?
Mhm.
Until you are ready to do the work, because it's not an easy work.
Most importantly, as you said, they shouldn't isolate themselves. They
Absolutely.
should surround themselves with a good support system.
Absolutely.
Are there any other things they can do, like breathing techniques,
Mhm.
anything of that
Mhm.
nature,
Mhm.
um, that they can do to maintain until they come to the realization that I need to go to a professional? Are there any other things that they can do?
Mhm. Increasing self-awareness is extremely important. Knowing when you're triggered,
Hmm.
right? Um, Knowing that something or someone or some situation has now reminded me of this terrible thing that's happened. Increasing your self-awareness ideally helps us to better respond in that moment. Because what we miss is we're triggered, something reminds us, we're
Hmm.
re-traumatized, and then we flow through that. We're in survival mode, right? And so increasing our self-awareness, grounding exercises, deep breathing, those are in response to the action that comes afterwards, right? If your anxiety is increased because you've been triggered, then yes, Do some deep breathing, do some grounding exercises. Remind yourself that you're safe. Remind yourself that you're not in that situation again. Those are in response to how the symptoms show up. Self-awareness is helps us identify when we're at the point of zero before we get to 60, or some of us go from zero to 100. And so increasing that self-awareness is extremely important. And a therapist will help you learn how to do that.
You have given us so much. And I thank you for sharing, taking time out of your busy schedule to share with us. And before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to leave on this record?
Thank you. Thank you. If I could leave you with one nugget, it would be you're worth your healing. You are worth your own healing, right? Remember that. And that will guide your actions that, yeah, I can't stay in this place, right? There's many resources that you can find, and you could take the time to find someone to talk to. There are, uh, you can go on a place like Psychology Today and filter things that are most important to you. People who work in different modalities like trauma processing, EMDR, cognitive based therapy. You can centralize your importance, but find the importance in yourself. There is hope for you to live beyond what has put you in survival mode, whether it's emotionally, mentally, psychologically. Find yourself, or find that space where you are enough for your own healing.
That it?
Because we could
Well,
go on and
oh, we
on.
could. And I know you've got to go back to work. I've got to go back to work. But
Mhm.
to our listening audience, we pray today that we have been able to give you hope and to encourage
Yes,
you
yes.
to continue to move from trauma toward
Triumph.
triumph. And don't forget, there is a process. And that process, um, as you work through that process, you will be able to move toward triumph. We're going to put in the chat at some portion, if it's not there already. Nakia has her own business called Redefining Moments. And she is doing an absolute great work working with children as well as adults to help them to move toward triumph. Nakia, thank you so much. I appreciate you. You know I love you. Thank you for sharing your
Yes,
time, your
yes,
knowledge, and
yes,
your skills. Thank you to Portia Wheatley, our
yes,
president
yes,
and CEO of Trophy of Life. You all check out our YouTube channel. You'll be able to see
yes,
this broadcast as well as others in the past. And don't forget, there is hope and
so,
encouragement in this chaotic environment that we live in.
yeah,
God bless y'all. Have a great week, a great
yes.
day, and see you soon.